We will never forget them, as they slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. That was Ronald Reagan. My name's Kevin, and welcome to Season 2 of History Goon. What's going on, everybody? I'm back. For better or worse. Some of you are probably like, I'm glad he's gone. But here I am, back again. All up in your business. Like a bad penny or, I don't know, herpes, I guess? You don't ever really get rid of that. It just kind of goes away for a little bit, takes some time off, and then flares back up and starts uploading podcasts again. So, anyway, welcome back. This is Season 2, Episode 1. And glad everybody stuck around. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. And I did promise to start this season off with a bang, or a series of bangs, to be more specific. We don't often look up into the night sky and think, it'd be really cool to talk about all the people that have died in space. And there's a lot of them. Some of them didn't die in space. They died en route to space. And we're going to talk about those. We're also going to talk about someone that almost died in space that would have been catastrophic, would have been a very, very bad situation for a lot of people had said person died. But we're going to start off by talking about people that don't count when they die in space because they're communists. I'm kidding. The Soviet space program is actually pretty rad. They did a lot of really, really interesting stuff. But still, I think I've made my feelings about communists and communism and socialism pretty well known here. I'm not for it. Hot take. I think it's bad. First, we're going to start off by looking into the Russians. We may have been the first to set foot on the moon, but they had the first man in space. So, sad American noises. Yuri Gagarin was born to a poor family in 1934 near the town of Grzinsk, which has since been renamed in his honor, Gagarin, in the Soviet Union. Obviously, because like I said, he's Russian. And you're not born in the 30s Russian and not born in the Soviet Union. Because that's just how it works. And the Soviet Union was vast. It wasn't the Mongol Empire. It wasn't the Roman Empire. Hell, it wasn't even the British Empire, but it was pretty big. But it's mostly big because Russia's big. So I guess there's that. The Romans and Mongols and white Mongols, aka the British, didn't have secret jars of underwear in case anybody escaped the paradise of communism that they would have to track down with dogs. He graduated from a trade school. Oh boy. Oh, I'm glad I caught myself. I almost said as a molester. No, he graduated from a trade school as a molder. He then moved into an industrial college in Saratov. While attending classes there, he took flight lessons. I'm not sure at this point in time for either country that's about to go to space. I don't think anybody starts taking flight lessons because they want to go to space. I think it's because they want to be like a fighter pilot or something like that. And then you just get harangued into becoming an astronaut, or in this case, a cosmonaut. Had American hero and alumni of the show, Dick Bong, survived his very, very unfortunate death. He would have been about 40 by the time NASA really started kicking off. After we got all the super cool German scientists to work at NASA, he would have been a prime, perfect candidate for astronaut training because he was crazy and also very good at flying things. So, like I said, I don't think anybody in the 40s or 50s went to flight school wanting to go to the moon. because I didn't think at that point in time we thought that was possible. Anyway, from here, he would go to Orenburg and join the Soviet Air Force cadet program and graduate in 1958. 3 years later, April 12th, 1961, the Vostok 1 was launched at 9:07 a.m. Moscow time, meaning that this happened at 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So while the bigwigs in Washington, D.C. are asleep, the Soviets are launching men into space. He broke through the atmosphere and did a full orbit of Earth in 1 hour and 29 minutes before re-entry and landing. That's pretty good. Meaning he did a full orbit of Earth in about 23 and a half hours less time than anybody else. So technically, I guess that makes him a time traveler. You want to start splitting hairs on it. He could technically be a time traveler. At the height of his flight, he was 187 miles off the surface of the Earth. Being the first man to leave the planet brought him immediate fame around the world. He would be given the Order of Lenin and named Hero of the Soviet Union and Pilot Cosmonaut of the Soviet Union. Very impressive titles. He never went back into space after that, but he did die in what was called a routine training flight, testing out a new model of MiGs, March 27th, 1968. So we had to talk about him, because not only is he super important, because again, he's the first man to leave the planet, there's a very strange story that comes before that. Author Robert A. Heinlein was traveling through Lithuania, specifically the Vilnius area, when he ran across a group of Red Army air cadets. A conversation ensued, and one of them told him that earlier that day, a space program had sent a, quote, unmanned craft into orbit. By unmanned, they meant they totally shot a dude into orbit. Heinlein thought this sounded odd, and later that day on TV, he saw a Soviet commander of some flavor saying that there had been a launch of an orbiting craft, but it was destroyed shortly after leaving the atmosphere due to the rapid decompression. So basically what that would mean is they shot a man into space in an aluminum can. And between the heat and the pressure of leaving the atmosphere, it crushed him. Somewhat like a bunch of billionaires in the ocean, which I know a lot of people are like, oh, it's dead billionaires. It still sucks. People died trying to do something super cool that none of us will ever be able to do. Maybe it's because they're billionaires. It doesn't really matter. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I hate billionaires because they're billionaires. I don't care. I have more important things in my own day-to-day life to worry about than how somebody else makes their money like that. As long as they're not politicians. Because you shouldn't go into politics as someone with like no money and leave it, 500 years later, like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer is going to, a billionaire. Because that seems a little to me. But what do I know? I just pay my taxes and fund things that I don't want to fund because I pay my taxes. Anyway, that's depressing. Let's talk about this, which is so much more uplifting. This made him even more curious, but unfortunately, he never found out anything more on the matter. He did, however, write some books that you may have probably heard of. He authored a book called The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, Stranger in a Strange Land, and of course, the classic that I still have to read. I loved the movie, but I have to read the book because I've heard it's really, really good. Starship Troopers. I'm doing my part. We do need to circle back to Gagarin for a second, though. He did mention this launch in his biography. He said the rumor of a failed manned flight was most likely due to Sputnik 1 being launched with a dummy pilot. The Russians gave this dummy pilot the most Russian name of all time, Ivan Ivanovich, which, I mean, that name comes with borscht and an AK. It's just like, hey, Russian. We don't want people to think he's Russian, so we're going to make him the Russian. So not only was this dummy pilot in there, there's also a tape recorder that would play on a timer to test the communications for the craft, which is actually a pretty good idea on their part. So according to his account, the craft that burned up in the atmosphere was manned by nothing more than basically a crash test dummy. Now, let's get into one with a little bit more controversy to it. Vladimir Komarov was born March 16th, 1927 in Moscow. His family, again, pretty poor. He was born in Moscow in the 1920s, so probably pretty poor. I mean, I guess that could just be said in general. Born in Russia between 1900 and 1990. If you're born there, you're probably pretty poor. Because believe it or not, redistributing everything doesn't make anybody any better, except for the people that are like way up here, because they get everything, and then you get to stand in line for stale bread. So, but we've never tried it here. We should totally try it here, even though it's never worked anywhere else. It'll work here because we've never tried it here. But they've tried it everywhere else and had it fail. But that wasn't real communism because we didn't try it yet. So glad I didn't go to college. His dad worked a bunch of low-end jobs trying to keep the family going, which was pretty tough during Soviet times. Vladimir's education started when he was just a kid in elementary school, where he had a natural gift for math. His good times are about to end, though, because he had to leave school in 1941 because, World War II and stuff. During his time working on a collective farm, he started collecting magazines and photographs all about planes. This guy, again, I'm going to bring up Dick Bong, runs a very interesting parallel path with him, where at a very young age, we're just like, ooh, planes, these are cool. And just kind of stuck with it and worked their asses off to go to do flight school. So not only is he collecting all these pictures and articles about planes, he also starts making model airplanes out of wood and paper, a lot like Dick Bong. And at 15, he entered the first Moscow Special Air Force School, which at 15, getting into a specialized school like that, that's pretty rad. A few weeks after joining the school, he starts having a tough time. He found out that his father had been killed in combat and that the school was being closed and moved. He would spend the rest of the war at the new base for the school in Siberia, which, if you don't know what Siberia is, it's basically Hoth with less infrastructure. He got a good education there, though. Not only did they learn how to fly and maintain aircraft, they also got schooling in zoology and foreign language, which the foreign language one makes sense. Zoology is a little weird. Unless you have to identify birds that are about to fly into your paper mache airplane, because that's that's how the Russian airplanes were. If I remember correctly, there was a German pilot during World War II that claimed to have 400 plus kills, but he was fighting specifically the Soviets, and their aircraft were so bad that you could shoot one down with rocks in a slingshot. Because again, not the highest quality of things coming out of the Soviet Union. He would graduate with honors towards the top of his class in 1945. The war would end before he could get into some rickety-ass Soviet prop plane and die in a crash somewhere in a field. From 1946 to 1949, he would spend his life going from high-end flight school to high-end flight school all over the Soviet Union, where he finally graduated in 1949. Not only does he get his flight wings, he also is commissioned as a lieutenant in the Soviet Army because he went to college and he's a pilot. I know, nowadays with the U.S. military, I think you have to be at least a lieutenant to be a pilot, which means that you have to go through college. Well, you could rise through the ranks, obviously, but generally, if you come out of college with a college education, you're going to go in as a lieutenant, bare minimum, I think. And going through flight school and stuff like that, obviously also a huge boon to you becoming a pilot because you're already a pilot. So the next few years are a whirlwind for him. Promoted to senior lieutenant in 1952, assigned as the chief pilot of the 486th Fighter Aviation Regiment, which I think, ADD break real quick, because I think that might be a very important one. Sorry, I was wrong. The one I was thinking of was the 588th Flight Regiment, which we're going to talk about them during this season as well. It's going to be a very, no, I'm not going to say aircraft heavy, but we're going to talk about some pilots in this season. Obviously, this episode, because we're already talking about pilots. But the 588th Russians are a completely different breed, and they made the Nazis very uncomfortable. They were also bad ass. Anyway, he started attending engineering courses in 1959 and was promoted again, this time to senior engineering lieutenant. And later that year, he would be selected for a test pilot position with Air Force Group 1. He and others reported to the newly formed TSPK, which is now called the Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center, which is pretty rad, which is just outside of Moscow, for assignment on 13th March 1960. Even though he was almost overqualified, Komarov was not chosen in the top 6 candidates because he did not meet the age, height, and weight restrictions specified by the chief designer of Russia's space program, Sergei Korolev. Because obviously, you can't be too tall or too heavy to be a pilot. It's like reverse jockeys. Because obviously jockeys, if you're a jockey like horse racing, you want to be like a small little light person. But also, if you're a pilot, you can't be 6'10" and 320 pounds because that's gonna throw off the ballast or whatever planes have in them to keep them flying. It makes the magic not work. That's about how I understand flight. Cosmonaut trainer Mark Galili noted in an interview, quote, "If the criteria had been different, certainly Komarov, who was very intelligent, would have been in the group. He had Air Force Academy flight experience. He had a great influence on the design of the Vostok and the Voskhod. At age 32, Komarov was the second oldest of the pilots chosen. Korolev had specified a maximum age of 27. Only 2 members of the first group, Pavel Byliev, who was on Voskhod 2, and Komarov himself, were all graduates of the Soviet Air Force Academy. In addition, only Komarov had experience as a flight test engineer on new aircraft." So, I mean, it's kind of stupid that this guy is so qualified that you won't take him because he is 5 years too old for some guidelines that somebody in the Kremlin set that's not even going to set foot near an airplane or in space at all. They just decided 27 is the cutoff. Stuff like that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I can understand if he's like 49 going, he's a little bit too old to be flying, in a spacecraft, but it just seems pretty dumb to me to have somebody so qualified, but you're just going to go, nah, he doesn't hit this one specific thing that we completely made up arbitrarily, so we can't let him do it. Now we're going to jump ahead a little. July of 1966, he was assigned to the Soyuz program, along with Alexei Lenov and the man we've mentioned before, Yuri Gagarin. Komarov was selected to command Soyuz 1 in 1967, with Gagarin as his backup cosmonaut. So Yuri Gagarin, who is super cool, is this guy's understudy. During the preparations for the space flight, both cosmonauts were working 12 to 14-hour days. Probably not in a factory, I wouldn't imagine. They're probably doing something space-related. On orbital insertion, the solar panels of the Soyuz model failed to fully deploy, preventing the craft from being fully powered and obscuring some of the navigation equipment. Komarov reported, quote, "Conditions are poor, the cabin parameters are normal, but the left solar panel didn't deploy. The electrical bus is at only 13 of 14 amps. The high-frequency communications are not working. I cannot orient the spacecraft to the sun. I tried to orient the spacecraft manually using the DL1 orientation engine, but the pressure remaining on the DL1 has gone down to 180. Komarov tried unsuccessfully to orient the Soyuz module for 5 hours. That I couldn't imagine how stressful that would be to be in a situation for 5 straight hours where you're like, I'm all by myself. If I don't fix this, I'm going to die in space. The craft was transmitting unreliable status information and lost communication on orbits 13 through 15 due to the failure of the high-frequency transmitter that should have maintained radio contact while the craft was out of range of the ultra-high frequency, or UHF, ground receivers. As a result of the problems with the craft, the Soviets did not launch the second Soyuz module, from which the cosmonauts were to perform an extravehicular activity to the Soyuz 1. So I think the game plan here was to send Soyuz 2 up, have these guys do some kind of primitive spacewalk to try to fix the boo-food solar panel and other things while they're both moving. But they ended up cutting the mission short. Komarov was ordered to reorient the craft using the ion flow sensors on orbits 15 to 17. I'm not going to pretend that I'm intelligent enough to understand what any of the science behind this is. I literally just told you I think planes might be magic because I don't know how they work. I know there's like thrust and all this other nonsense. I'm not a scientist. I'm a history guy. I don't really, again, I don't understand how any of it works. Komarov did not have enough time to attempt a manual reentry until orbit 19. Manual orientation relied on using the equipped Visor periscope device, but to do this, Komarov had to be able to see the sun. To reach the designated landing site at Orsk, the retro fire had to take place on the night side of the Earth. Komarov oriented the spacecraft manually on the day side, then used the gyro platform, which, again, I'd be more comfortable with a Euro platform, which just pita and meat and tzatziki. I'd eat it on a platform. I'd eat it on a bus. I'd eat it off the floor. I don't know. I was trying to do a Dr. Seuss thing, but I might be retarded. So I tried to use the gyro platform as a reference so that he could orient the craft for a night side retrofire. I think retrofire is like firing off secondary engines. Again, look at me. I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm not a rocket doctor. I don't know how any of this works. He successfully re-entered the Earth's atmosphere on his 19th orbit, but the module's drogue and main braking parachute failed to deploy correctly. Because why would that work? Nothing else has worked. The module crashed into the ground, killing Komarov at 6:24 a.m. Obviously, because he was just shot out of the sun and then directly through the atmosphere and into the ground. I don't think he would have made it, even if there was a rescue crew there. Nikolai Kamanian recorded the Soyuz 1 capsule crashed into the ground at 30 to 40 meters per second. It's 98 to 131 feet per second. So if you want to try to convert that over to miles an hour, if you're a math person, go for it. I'm pretty sure he was going really, really fast. And the remains of Komarov's body were an irregular lump 30 centimeters or 12 inches in diameter and 80 centimeters or 31 inches long. There are pictures of his remains, and he looks like if you took a bag of, you can't really, it's not really Kingsford. I would say probably Zarsford charcoal briquettes and just kind of glued them all together and then set them on fire and then put it on a table. That's what it looked like. It's just a big black burnt lump of shit on a table. And it is horrifying to realize that was at one point in time a big, like full-sized dude. and he's now just a charcoal briquette. I don't know if you could put him in a Traeger or not. I'm pretty sure those are just pellets. Put him in a Weber, though. 3 hours after the capsule crashed, Kladish, Tulian, Rudenkov, and other state commission members visited the site. At 21:45, Kamanian accompanied Komarov's remains to the Orsk aerodrome. The word aerodrome always just makes me think of the old Ninja Turtles cartoon with the Technodrome, which was awesome. And the toy was super cool. I always wanted it when I was a kid, but I never got it. And now that I'm an adult, people my age have started collecting stuff, and you can't touch one for like $500. So I'm not going to buy a Technodrome unless you guys want to support me over at Patreon, patreon.com/1159media. Okay, so his remains were loaded on an II-18. I believe that's an airplane. 10 minutes before departure, an AN-12 landed with Kuznetsov and several cosmonauts. Kamanian's aircraft arrived in Moscow in the early hours the next morning. The aircraft had to divert to Sheremetyenov, since all the other airfields around Moscow were closed to takeoffs or landings due to the weather. What a name. Konstantin Vershinian, his orders were that Komarov's remains were to be photographed and that immediately cremated so that a state burial in the Kremlin wall could take place. The remains underwent a quick autopsy, which I don't know how, that morning, and then they were cremated. I don't know how they distinguished anything in an autopsy. Cause of death would be, ouch, oh my God, this is hot, and then hitting the earth at 12,000 miles an hour. Again, not a doctor, not a scientist, just a dude with a microphone. On April 25th, a response to Komarov's death by his fellow cosmonauts was published in Pravda. Quote, "For the forerunners, it is always more difficult. They tread the unknown paths, and these paths are not straight. They have sharp turns, surprises, and dangers. But anyone who takes the pathway into orbit never wants to leave it. And no matter what difficulties or obstacles there are never strong enough to deflect such a man from his chosen path. While his heart beats in his chest, a cosmonaut will always continue to challenge the universe. Vladimir Komarov was one of the first on this treacherous path." That's pretty cool. When interviewed on May 17th by the Pravda newspaper, Yuri Gagarin alluded to the failure of the administration to listen to the concerns about the Soyuz module that the Cosmonaut Corps had identified. And he maintained that Komarov's death should teach the establishment to be more righteous in their testing and evaluation of, quote, all the mechanisms of the spaceship, even more attentive to all stages of checking and testing, even more vigilant in their encounters with the unknown. He has shown us how dangerous the pathway to space is. His flight and his death will teach us courage. In May 1967, Gagarin and Lenov criticized program head Vasily Mishin's, quote, poor knowledge of the Soyuz spacecraft and the details of its operation and lack of cooperation in working with the cosmonauts in flight and training activities. He also asked that Kamanian, were to cite him in the official crash report. So he wants to be written in on the chain of command of this crash report so that he can use that in the future to help make less bad decisions. Also, there's a very thin line between ballsy and stupid when it comes to saying things about the Soviet government. And he is directly on that very, very thin line. Because we're at a point where, yeah, the Soviet Union is starting to chill out a little bit. But if you criticize them too much, they would probably still make you disappear. Yes, Stalin is gone and he had all of his people killed and everything constantly and had pictures updated to have people removed from them. But the Soviet Union is still going to Soviet Union if they need to. If I'm Yuri Gagarin, I am not getting anywhere near anything that flies or windows or government officials. About half an hour before the Soviet Union's Soyuz spacecraft was scheduled to touch down on June 30th, 1971 in the plains of Kazakhstan, a flight control center in Yevpatria in western Crimea was met with an unexpected silence. 3 Soviet cosmonauts, Grigory Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsanyev, I don't know, were making their descent to the Earth after a record-breaking time spent aboard the Salyut-1 space station, where they performed all kinds of experiments and they explored the outside of it, because this is one of the first, actual spacewalks, where there's people outside of the craft, just floating around in the ether. The mission Soyuz 11 launched on June 6, 1971. By the time of the Apollo 11 moon landing 2 years prior, the longest time humans spent in space was only about 2 weeks. The Soviet crew had spent 23 days in space, setting a new record for human spaceflight endurance, and were finally coming home. As the ship made its re-entry, one crew communicator back in Yevpatria, this town that starts with a Y, expressed concerns about the lack of reports from the cosmonauts. Quote, "We asked Dobrovolsky the whole time to give us a running commentary as soon as the descent modules entered our coverage zone, but he hasn't said a word." Crew communicator Alexei Yelenseyev? I don't know. I'm going to go with that. Said according to Boris Chertok, a space engineer who recounted the mission in his 4-volume memoir called Rockets and People, very creative, said, quote, "It's strange that Volkov is quiet. During the last session, he was very talkative." Well, we're about to find out that it's really not strange that he's quiet. The module carrying the men landed around 2 a.m., about 56 miles southwest of the town of Krasnal. A rescue team was immediately dispatched. Chertok recalled that there were another 20 minutes of silence when the team received no reports. Finally, one lead Soviet engineer with a disturbed expression on his face would break the news he received from Moscow. Quote, "They're seated in tranquil poses." Chertok wrote, the 3 cosmonauts were found dead inside the ship. Now, we've talked about the Soviets. Now we've got to talk about the American side of things. To be fair, there has never been an American space flight that's been a disaster in space. Ours tend to be more grounded or suborbital when we have our disasters. And there's 3. I'm only talking about 2 because one of them I just didn't think that we needed to do 6 hours on space disasters, even though this is fun. Is it fun or is it sad? I don't know the difference sometimes. Should call my therapist. Anyway, January 27th, 1967, we hit our very first American space disaster. Let's meet our crew that's about to meet their fate. Roger Chaffee was a native of Grand Rapids, Michigan. He attended Purdue University, where he received a bachelor's degree in aeronautical engineering. After graduating college, he joined the U.S. Navy at the rank of lieutenant because, again, went to college. Shortly after joining the Navy, he served as a safety officer and quality control officer for Heavy Photographic Squadron 62 at the Naval Air Station in Jacksonville, Florida. In January 1963, he entered the Air Force Institute of Technology at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where the alien craft actually are. They're not at Area 51. They're in Ohio. Do your research, people. He does this to work on a Master of Science degree in reliability engineering. He logged more than 2,300 hours of flight time, including more than 2,000 hours in jet aircraft, which is pretty cool. Chaffee was one of the 3rd group of astronauts selected by NASA in October 1963. In addition to participating in the overall training program, He was also tasked with working on flight control communication systems, instrumentation systems, and attitude and translation control systems in the Apollo branch of the astronaut office. I think an astronaut office would be a very interesting thing to see. On March 21st, 1966, he was selected as one of the pilots of the AS-204 mission, the first three-man Apollo flight. So all that said, he's no dummy, and he is more than qualified to be the captain of the first Apollo flight. Next up is Virgil Grisham, born and raised in Mitchell, Indiana. He also graduated from Purdue University. He gained a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. From college, he would join the U.S. Air Force, and in August 1955, he would enter the Air Force Institute of Technology, again at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where the aliens are, or the craft at least. I'm pretty sure they've already gotten rid of the pilots of those, but he does this to study aeronautical engineering. He entered the school at Edwards Air Force Base in California in October 1956 and returned to Wright-Patterson in May 1957 as a test pilot assigned to the fighter branch. This dude logged 4,600 hours flight time, 3,500 hours in a jet aircraft. Pretty good. So at this point in time, most of the flight is going to be in jets because jets are kind of the new thing. Your early hours are probably in like a Cessna Cub or like a Piper or something like that. Like a small like prop airplane, just to make sure that you know how to run an airplane before they put you in a rocket, basically. Grisham was an Air Force lieutenant colonel. He received his wings in March 1951. He flew 100 combat missions in Korea in F-86s with the 334th Fighter Interceptor Squad. And upon returning to the United States in 1952, he became a jet instructor at Bryan, Texas. So again, absolutely no slouch when it comes to experience in or around any aircraft. As a matter of fact, he is one of the first 7 astronauts in NASA. He is a veteran of the Mercury and Gemini programs as well. Next up is Edward White II. He's born in San Antonio, Texas, earned a Bachelor of Science degree from the United States Military Academy. He then got a Master's of Science degree in Aeronautical Engineering at the University of Michigan. White was again an Air Force Lieutenant Colonel. He received flight training in Florida and in Texas following his graduation from West Point. So again, no dummy. He then spent 3.5 years in Germany with a fighter squadron flying F-86s and F-100s. He attended the Air Force Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base in California in 1959. White was later assigned to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, again where the alien craft are, not Area 51, as an experimental test pilot with the Aeronautical Systems Division. In this assignment, he made flight tests for research and weapons systems development, wrote technical engineering reports, and made recommendations for improvement in aircraft design and construction. He logged more than 3,000 hours flight time, including 2,200 hours in a jet. White was named as a member of the astronaut team selected by NASA in September of 1962. He was pilot for Gemini 4, which was a 66 revolution 4-day mission that began on June 3rd and ended on June 7th, 1965. So I believe 66 revolutions means that they orbited 66 times around the planet. During the third revolution, he carried out the first extravehicular activity in the United States, meaning that he was the first American to ever leave a spacecraft while it was still in space, where it wasn't landed on the moon. Or was it? Or wasn't it? We don't know. He was outside Gemini 4 for 21 minutes and became the first man to control himself in space during EVA, which is extravehicular activity, with a maneuvering unit. Other highlights of this mission included cabin depressurization, opening of cabin doors, and 12 scientific and medical experiments. He received the NASA Exceptional Service Medal and the U.S. Air Force Senior Astronaut Wings for this flight. March 21st, 1966, he was named as one of the pilots of the AS-204 mission, which is Apollo 1. So, I feel like I have to be a little clear here. I'm not playing favorites by having more information on the US astronauts than I do on the Russian cosmonauts. Um, the Soviet Union was shockingly pretty secretive about their space program and about just about everything else they did, including when a bunch of kids died on a mountain somewhere that they don't like to talk about how they died, but they definitely died under mysterious circumstances. Um, and we might have to talk about that at some point. And again, just to be clear, that is as close to being a Soviet apologist as I will ever get. I'll give individual Soviets credit where it's due, but the system as a whole um, is cordially invited to eat my butt. January 27th, 1967, our three-man crew is scheduled to run a practice test at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. They approach the Apollo Command and Service Module, which is going to be called the ACS from here on, which, considering how far technology has come since then, looks like the top of a water tower. It's kind of hard to believe that in the late 60s, the entirety of NASA's program, all of their computers and all of their technology, doesn't hold a candle to your phone that you have in your pocket every day. You could have literally worked circles around NASA with your phone. My computer that I record with would have been considered some kind of witchcraft supercomputer at that point. And it's really not even, it's like, it's a good computer, but it's not that crazy, you know? Actually, I'm going to do a quick ADD break because I want to know exactly how big NASA's computers were at the time. Okay, so just for reference, and this is just off of a very quick Google search, the first NASA computer had a storage of 4 kilobytes of RAM and 32 kilobytes of ROM. The NES had the original Nintendo was twice as powerful as NASA's first computer. That's insane. Uh, anyway, so this thing stood at 36 feet tall and was just over 12 feet in diameter. So 3 dudes crammed into this thing, probably a little tight. This thing was rated for low Earth and lunar orbit, and obviously traveling into space, because to do lunar orbit, you have to be able to get there. You can't just send something up there and, like, this module out into space. You have to be able to get into space to orbit. I feel like I'm trying to convince you guys that I'm not stupid, and we both know that I kind of am. The crew entered the module and did a bunch of astronaut stuff. I don't know how any of it works. I bet there was toggle switches and buttons. I don't know. The testing started, but shortly after the crew reported a fire on board. The fire quickly spread, and due to the high pressure, pure oxygen atmosphere that they are in, all of the flammable materials inside, including the interior structure of the capsule, the fire spread. And if you're not familiar, fire loves oxygen. And when you're in a high oxygen environment and there's a fire, you're going to have a bad time. Unfortunately, a combination of the door mechanism and the weight of the door itself, it wasn't a quick process to open the door, especially when the inside of the cabin is already pressurized. The fire rips through the interior of the craft, and the crew would all perish in the fire. The fire burned so hot that it was hours before the door could be opened to recover the bodies. Autopsies would show that all 3 members of the crew died of heart attacks due to carbon monoxide from the fire. All these years later, there still isn't a definitive cause for the fire, but it's highly suspected it's probably caused by an electrical issue. The investigation identified 6 contributing factors to the disaster, including a sealed cabin pressurized with an oxygen atmosphere, the presence of combustible materials throughout the cabin, vulnerable wiring carrying spacecraft power, which that sounds pretty cool, vulnerable plumbing carrying a combustible and corrosive coolant, poop fire, inadequate provisions for the crew to escape, and inadequate provisions for rescue or medical assistance. But at the same time, if you really think about it, if you had gotten into space, right, and you had a medical emergency, it's not like you can just call space EMTs. You have to do everything inside. So I get it, but at the same time, it's designed that way for a reason, I think. As a result of the investigation, changes were made to the design and safety protocols of the Apollo spacecraft to prevent similar accidents in the future. The crew of Apollo 1, along with other astronauts and cosmonauts, are honored on the Space Mirror Memorial at the Kennedy Space Center. So yeah, we're that cool. We'll put dead Russian cosmonauts on there too. Because with NASA, it's not so much about the country, it's more about humanity as a whole, I think, and the achievements that we're getting and making through going to space. Even though NASA is garbage now and they don't do anything, and we have to depend on a gorillionaire from the internet to have a space program. And I know people don't like him. Whatever, I don't care. I think his cars are gay, but it's pretty cool that he has his own space program. Launch Complex 34, where the test took place, was used only once more after the Apollo 1 disaster before being dismantled, leaving only the concrete launch pedestal that bears 2 plaques in memory of the Apollo 1 crew. Now we're going to get into one that I don't personally remember because I was born a couple years too late for it. A lot of folks listening to this will remember this. A lot of folks listening to this will remember watching this. Matter of fact, fun personal story. My dad stayed home sick. I've asked him about this when I was starting with everything with this. And he told me that he stayed home sick from school to watch the Challenger launch on TV. My mom, I guess, actually watched it in school because it was just that thing where this is big, so we're gonna wheel the old CRTVs, CRT TVs in, and warm up the tubes and let everybody watch Space Shuttle. This is probably the best known space disaster in human history so far. Because, again, a lot like when I say things about World War II being the biggest war in human history, I like to add so far because who knows? I'm not going to spend as much time going over the crew for this one because there's 7 of them and their full backgrounds would take forever. And there's an absolutely insane detail with this one that I want to spend a little bit of time on. So I think the best place to start here is with a crew member that wasn't even supposed to be a crew member. Krista McAuliffe, a 37-year-old mother of 2. McAuliffe was a high school social studies and English teacher with 15 years of experience in the classroom. She became an overnight celebrity and the focus of extensive media attention, as did her family and students at Concord High School. McAuliffe trained for 6 months to join the crew as a payload specialist. She was to help with experiments on the space station, as well as give 2 lessons that would be broadcast to classrooms across the country. The 2 lessons that McAuliffe was planned were titled The Ultimate Field Trip and Where We've Been, We're Going, and Why. So if I remember correctly, because I didn't go into a huge amount of detail with that, I'm pretty sure that there was like a senator or a congressman that was really pushing for this whole initiative of having an educator go to space so that we can get kids interested in wanting to get into like the STEM field and keep the space program going. And then there was another one that's like, okay, well, if we're going to do that, I want this person to do it. And the other one's like, no, 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 I know the perfect person. So they're like bickering and arguing. And then finally she's selected. Um, it sucks. It sucks for her and for her family and for all the people that are on this craft what's about to happen. But the fact that she probably didn't necessarily want to do this, it was more, I would assume, more like coerced into doing it. Like, oh, this is going to be great. You'll be the first teacher in space. And there's probably a lot of promises made that would never be kept because uh, the government will make promises and then not keep them. It's just kind of what they do, if we haven't noticed at this point. Um, anyway, next up is Ellison Onizuka. Ellison was the first person of Japanese descent to travel into space. He's born and raised in Hawaii, and he liked to share the culture with his crewmates. This dude was doing pig roast during training, so he'd be like, he would have been my favorite person to hang out with because he'd be like, oh yeah, no, 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 like yeah, space, cool, great. When is the pig ready? And do we have pineapple to go with said pig? Like many of his fellow Challenger astronauts, Onizuka was a trained engineer who served in the armed forces during the 1970s, serving as a test pilot throughout the decade. In 1978, he was one of 35 hopefuls chosen for NASA's first new astronaut program since 1969. The group is dubbed the 35 New Guys. Very creative, NASA. Well done. Despite the presence of 6 women in the classroom. But you know, women can be guys too when it's a group of people and you can just go, hey guys, you know. But you can't do that now. Man, I feel like I'm gonna annoy people if I get if I start bringing my personal politics and beliefs into the show. But I might, just because why not? You know, it's my show and I can talk about whatever I want and talk about my feelings on certain things. Onizuka flew on one previous space shuttle mission, which is the third flight of the Discovery in 1985. Ronald McNair became just the second black man to reach space. This dude went through some shit as a kid because he grew up in South Carolina during segregation. He earned a PhD in physics from MIT. That's insane. I couldn't imagine how hard it would be to get into MIT, or how smart you have to be to get into MIT. Just a few years later, he was invited to join the class of 1978 at NASA. No black person had ever flown into space at this point. 2 had been chosen for the astronaut training program in the 60s, but one was not selected to join NASA, and the other was invited to become an astronaut. He actually ended up dying during a test flight, not for NASA. He was testing like an experimental jet, I believe. NASA worked to recruit, like they worked specifically to try to recruit potential black astronauts when it resumed its recruiting program, in part by using Nichelle Nichols as an iconic Star Wars cast member. Um, she played Uhura, and they're just like, hey, space black lady, why don't you tell these other guys that going to space is pretty cool? um, so I need to apologize for something that I just said. I know that I said Uhura was a Star Wars character. I was wrong. I meant to say Star Trek. I'd really hate to get the inferior Star Trek confused with the superior Star Wars. Neither are Indiana Jones or Lord of the Rings, but before one of you nerds comes for me, Star Wars is better than Star Trek. I said what I said. I love you guys. Judith Resnick. Old Judy here scored a perfect 1600 on the SAT. She attended Carnegie Mellon for undergraduate and then earned a PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Maryland. In between her 2 degrees, she worked for RCA, helping on high-level projects for major clients, including NASA, and then went on to work for the National Institute of Health as a biomedical engineer. Resnick made her first flight into space aboard the Discovery in 1984. In doing so, she became the first Jewish woman and the first American Jew to make it off the planet. And while I was writing this, all I could think of is that one scene from History of the World, Part 1.
See, Jews in space.
She was also only the second woman ever to make it into space, following in the footsteps of Sally Ride. Gregory Jarvis was a crew member that made his way to NASA through less conventional means, beginning with him joining the Air Force during the Vietnam War and working in the Space Division with a specialty in satellites. After his discharge, he began to work for Hughes Aircraft, which is a major military and NASA contractor, and would eventually work on space-related aircraft. After nearly a decade of working for Hughes, he applied for and beat out 600 other engineers at the company for the opportunity to work on a NASA space shuttle. Technically, he'd be a payload specialist, which is just like a blanket term for any non-astronaut who goes into space on a NASA mission. Jarvis was twice bumped from the flight roster by politicians. Again, politicians being politicians and just doing whatever they want with like zero repercussions for what they do. He was first billed to make his journey into space in April 1985, but was replaced by Senator Jake Garn, who is a Republican from Utah, and then got pushed back in line by Representative Bill Nelson, who was a Democrat of Florida, in early January of 1986. Some things never change. We just have to continue to argue and bicker across the aisle for literally no reason over the stupidest thing. I want him to go to space. You have the wrong color tie, so I don't want him to go to space. Michael J. Smith is our next. Smith was a Vietnam veteran who joined NASA in the late 70s and early 80s. He spent a lot of the time in the 80s helping NASA develop new parts and procedures for the shuttle program. Smith was a shortlister to pilot shuttle flights for a couple years leading up to the Challenger when he was finally selected to sit behind the sticks. In 1984, he was assigned to pilot the Space Shuttle Atlantis' second flight in November of 1985. He nearly replaced the pilot who wound up flying an earlier Challenger mission. This one was in January of 85, a year before this shuttle's flight. Next up, Dick Scobie, another Vietnam veteran of the U.S. Air Force. He spent 3 years flying combat missions before entering a test pilot program for experimental aircraft in the late 70s. He was selected for astronaut training in 1978 from the same class as Onizuka, McNair, and Resnick. He aced all of the training and exams in that course, and he would be selected as the captain of the Challenger for its April flight. Now, we've met our crew. The day of January 28th, 1986, the Challenger is set to take off. When it comes to science and rocketry, it's shocking how much a tiny, tiny thing can affect everything. It seems like if a rocket were taking off and a bumblebee landed on it, it would be enough to cause an absolutely catastrophic issue. The air temperature at time of launch was a record low for a shuttle launch. 18 degrees Fahrenheit, or for everybody else that's wrong, -6 degrees Celsius. The time launch time rolls around at 9:38, it's reached a balmy 26 degrees in Cape Canaveral, Florida, and there is ice on the launch tower when the shuttle is supposed to take off. Phone calls and conferences were made, and the launch was pushed back to 11:38 a.m. During the launch process, 9 puffs of dark smoke were seen coming from the right-hand side of the SRB, which is the solid rocket booster. And much like you, I was wondering, what the hell is a solid rocket booster? It's a type of engine that provides high thrust for a short time period using pre-mixed solid fuel. Thank you, Wikipedia. The cold temperatures prevented the O-rings around the SRB from creating a good seal. So there's a lot of speculation that makes a bunch of sense that the moisture in the air allowed water in around the back of the O-ring and then froze, which will definitely not allow a good seal. This then allowed hot gas to get past the O-ring. Liquid aluminum oxide from the burned propellant worked in behind the O-rings and then cooled and became solid. And this is basically going to block any more hot gases from escaping or passing, which would result in explosions because you have a lot of heat and you have a lot of pressure and there's nowhere for that to go. And it's going to find the path of least resistance, which in this case is through the side of the engine. The shuttle was told to throttle up shortly after takeoff. The crew knew there was a fire, but it's kind of unknown if the folks on the ground didn't think it was a big deal because the affected tank was actually designed to fall off after it dumped its load. So if you've ever watched like the shuttles go up, you get up to a certain point and stuff just starts falling off. This solid core booster is one of those things that would fall off because uh, after it's used all of its fuel, it just disconnects and back down into the ocean where I'm assuming they pick it up. I hope. If not, it's going to make that Swedish girl very upset. Word from the ground control gave the word to throttle up, and Scobie responded, quote, "Roger, go at throttle up." The last words heard from the Challenger before the explosion was pilot Mike Smith saying, quote, "Uh-oh." About 2 minutes after the initial launch, white vapor was seen jetting out of the side of the shuttle. The following boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion cooked off with an estimated 3 million pounds of force, which is about 1.5 kilotons. So I had to do the math. That's about a tenth of the size of the explosion of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Um, Pretty not good. Obviously, the shuttle broke up and crashed into the Atlantic, and it took 3 months of searching to recover the crew compartment. Um, Obviously, there was no survivors. Generally, when there is a spacecraft explosion, there's not going to be anybody that makes it. Because if it explodes in space, you're going to die. If it explodes before you get to space, you're going to die. Or, if you're lucky, the crew compartment will disconnect and you'll land in the ocean. And hopefully they get to you. If not, you're going to die. Now, there's a really weird and funny detail about the lead up to the launch and subsequent disaster of the Challenger. Before Krista McAuliffe was selected for the flight, there was another person lined up for that spot. A man by the name of Carol Spinney was originally supposed to be on the flight. That name may ring a bell for some people, and if it doesn't, Carol Spinney is the man that played Big Bird on Sesame Street. Why would we want to send Big Bird to space? Because that would have been a huge opportunity for NASA to have just an army of kids beating down the doors to be the next generation of space explorers. Because you just got to watch Big Bird go into space. He just reached from the planet through the atmosphere and touched the face of God. And he's Big Bird. He's fantastic. I was more of a Mr. Rogers guy. Just saying. Sesame Street was all right, but Fred was my boy. So why didn't Big Bird go? Nothing political. It all boiled down to the complications of making a functional suit for an 8-foot, 2-inch tall yellow bird. Because obviously, if you're going to send Big Bird into space, he needs to have a spacesuit. And you can't just you can't just be like, "Hey kids, this dude that you're seeing here, this is Big Bird. Because that would have crushed so many kids to know that Big Bird was a man in a suit. So you have to have a functional suit for Big Bird. And you can't just have Big Bird in like a half suit with no helmet, just walking down the thing with everybody. And then have a quick cut where everybody gets on, but not Big Bird. Because then kids still think Big Bird is on the shuttle. Now, what would have happened if they had somehow worked around all these issues and we had launched Big Bird along with the crew? Millions of people skipped work or school to stay home and watch the Challenger launch. There was TVs wheeled into classrooms so that students could witness it. Millions of children would have watched in horror as their giant yellow hero exploded. Here's a quote from Spinney's memoir. His book is called The Wisdom of Big Bird, but this part was actually cut from the book. He recalled this in an interview later. Quote, in 1984, NASA created the Spaceflight Participant Program to select teachers, journalists, artists, and other people who could bring their unique perspective to the human spaceflight experience as a passenger on the space shuttle. A review of past documentation shows that there were initial conversations with Sesame Street regarding the potential participation of a Challenger flight, but the plan was never approved. I couldn't imagine. Like, you would, again, if Big Bird dies on TV, you would have to have Mr. Rogers come in and be like, all right, kids, so we're going to talk about how sometimes people die. And it's sad, but it's part of life. And oh my God, I could imagine. Because I believe, I'm remembering very, very vividly an episode of Mr. Rogers where he's talking to one of the kids about their fish dying. And he goes into great detail about how death is part of life and you have to just live life to the fullest and enjoy the time that you're given. I could only imagine the speech that he would give after Big Bird exploded. Oh my goodness. Well, anyway, I'm happy to be back. I've got my new setup, as you can see. It's there's not books there anymore. They're on the floor behind me. If you're watching on video, I've got a Stark flag, which is the Green Mountain Boys flag from the Revolutionary War. I have a sword because I had to have a sword. It's like an 1840s, 1850s cavalry saber replica. Pretty rad. I have my actual Russian-made Mosin Nagant, which is so cool. And I also have something I'm very happy to have is the shadow box for my grandfather's flag from when he fought in World War II. And I've got all of his medals and his dog tags, and I just have to finish the display. But time has been an issue. But anyway, thank you for coming back. I've got more planned. It's going to be a good season. We're going to loosen up a little bit. It's going to be going to have more fun. I'm going to just not be so stiff and serious all the time. I'm going to be me. And and I'll apologize in advance for me. Anyway, next week might be a little bit of a hot button topic due to current world affairs, but it's something in history. And it's just a really good thing that nothing bad has ever happened between these two groups of people ever, ever, ever again since then. Spoiler alert. It is. It's still happening. It probably always will because, anyway, you can check me out if you want to get early access to the show. Go over to Patreon, patreon.com/1159media, $5 a month. Gets you early access to my show, History Goon. Gets you early access to Guestnicity with Luther. Gets you early access to Almost Fiction with Chase. It gets you early access to 911 calls with the operator. Also gets you early access and backdoor access to the Never Daily, and it also gets you backdoor access to Guestnicity. I don't do that because I'm a solo show and I'm not a conversational show. And you guys don't want to listen to me swear and step on my own tongue constantly because I can't talk. Thank you, Editing Magic. I also have a Ko-Fi if you want to support me directly. ko-fi.com/historygoonpod. If you want to throw me $5, I greatly appreciate it. Any little bit helps. I'm trying to. I want to do this full time, is what I'm trying to get at. But I can't do that if I don't have a job, right? No. But I can't do that unless I'm making money. um, because believe it or not, I have bills to pay, unfortunately. And I have a child to feed, which is awesome. I love that kid. He's great. Matter of fact, actually, speaking of astronauts, last night when I called to say goodnight to him, last night as of time of recording, called and said goodnight, went through everything, and then his mom sent me a video about 10 minutes later of him playing astronaut while he's supposed to be going to bed. And he's sitting on his little thing, and he's going boop, 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 like making boop, boop, boop noises on his hand. Then he looks at her, stone face, super serious. He goes, activate, activate. And then he starts making rocket noises. I'm like, this kid is awesome. I don't think that I got this specific child due to like genetic mystery. I think that like he was chosen to be like, this is your son because he's just as weird as you. uh, I love that kid. Anyway, I will be back next week. Sorry, I'm laughing and thinking about my kid and I get like the happies going. Be back next week. And until then, we're all going to die someday. So go out and do some goon shit and leave a mark on the world. Thank you.